All right, maybe we'll get started then. Maybe people got caught up, but okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Evidence-Based Services Committee Roundtable for the month of December. Today, we will have the great pleasure of having a wonderful panel led by two excellent presenters on creating safe spaces for sexual and gender minority youth. I'll start off with a little bit of housekeeping, then do an introduction for the two main presenters. Then we'll turn it over to more of a discussion format at about 3:50 or so. At that time, I will introduce the discussants, the three discussants at that time. So for a little bit of housekeeping, whichever email you use to register for today's roundtable, please be on the lookout for a feedback survey that we will be sending to you at that email address. If you have signed up to receive social work CEUs, the CEUs will be awarded based on both your time in the webinar today and your completion of the forthcoming survey. You will be expected to attend at least 90% of today's roundtable webinar to be considered in awarding of the CEUs. However, whether or not you have signed up to receive CEUs, we would be greatly appreciative if you could fill out the forthcoming survey to give us feedback on the quality of today's webinar. Okay, thank you very much. So there's that little bit of housekeeping on there. Another housekeeping thing real quick, if people have questions and comments, please put them in the chat. Tommy and myself will do our best to take care of those, keep them to the end. We'll circle back to those at the end. And now turning to the introduction of our two main presenters, quick bio sketches. First, we have Kimberly Allen. Kim has worked for the Hawaii Department of Health, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division for 13 years and currently holds a position as a practice development specialist. As chair of the CAMHD Safe Spaces Committee, Kim advocates for legislation, which resulted in the passage of Hawaii Law Statute 577-29 HRS, lowering the age of consent for outpatient mental health services to 14. Kim writes policies and procedures and contract standards to follow best practice guidelines of providing mental health services to LGBTQ+ youth. She also creates and facilitates training for staff, providers, and our system partners on practices to improve the CAMD and system of care for LGBTQ+ youth and their families. We also have the pleasure of having Robin Lee, who is the Center Chief of the Maui Family Guidance Center within CAMD. Robin has been a member of CAMD's Safe Spaces Committee since its inception and participates in conducting LGBTQ trainings for staff, providers, and various social service and government agencies here in Hawaii. She has previously served as the co-chair for the Hawaii chapter of GLSEN, which is the national organization dedicated to providing safe schools for all youth, regardless of sexual orientation or gender identity. Robin served on the LGBTQ Youth in Juvenile Justice Committee on the island of Oahu prior to moving to Maui in 2015. She participated on the Maui Interscholastic League's task force, helping to develop a policy for transgender athletes to be able to participate in sports. She currently volunteers as a co-presenter for Mental Health America for the Youth Suicide and Bullying Prevention, as well as the Suicide Prevention 101 trainings. So welcome, Kim and Robin. Thank you very much for presenting today. Take it away.
Thank you, Brad. Thanks everyone for showing up today. We look forward to talking about this topic with you. And so I'll just go into what we're going to talk about today. To start out, we're just going to do a little bit on terminology, just so everybody has a foundation of what we're, the terms that we use. We're going to watch a short video, about 12 minutes on the ABCs of LGBTQ. We're going to talk about some risks and statistics related to LGBTQ youth. And then we'll talk about how to make a safe space. And hopefully some of you haven't already been to one of our webinars before. We've done a lot this year. And so some of this might be a review for some of you, but we're hoping to at least present some information to hopefully some of you haven't seen it already.
Okay, thanks, Kim. So as Kim was saying, we're going to go over some terminology, not knowing where everybody is on this topic, and we're not going to get too specific, but we will go over a few terms, particularly as it relates to gender identity. So first of all, some of the acronyms you may be familiar with or may not be familiar with. LGBTQ seems to be the most common one used. That stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer or questioning. That is the acronym we typically utilize when we are doing this training. Some other acronyms that are common are sexual and gender minorities, or SGM. And more recently, more common has been SOGI, which is sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression. It's important to know that everybody has a SOGI. Everybody has a sexual orientation, a gender identity, and a gender expression. So within the acronym LGBTQ, the LGB portion of that is one's sexual orientation. Okay, it's who one is physically or emotionally attracted to. Sexual orientation and gender identity are not the same thing. They're two very separate things. So like I said, we want to talk a little bit more about gender identity and the different gender identities. So the most common that people are probably familiar with is cisgender, although they probably aren't familiar with the term cisgender. But cisgender is someone who identifies as the same gender that they were born as. So the opposite of cisgender would be transgender. Now, transgender is actually it's an umbrella term. So it typically what it means is someone identifying as the opposite gender as the gender they were assigned at birth. So within that umbrella term of transgender, we have folks who identify as gender expansive or non-binary. So they could identify as a gender that's either outside of the binary of male or female, or somewhere in between male and female. And then gender expansive, again, expanding on the idea of what gender actually means. Once gender expression, that is yet a different term, meaning how you express yourself. So most commonly, how you dress, how you wear your hair, how you talk, how you walk, things like that. Everybody has their own gender expression. And then another term that we're going to talk about, and then you'll see in the video, are microaggressions. And even though most people are probably familiar with what that may mean, it's basically, it's a statement or action, could be subtle or indirect, unintentional toward a marginalized group of people. And then homophobia, that could be prejudice or dislike of people who identify as homosexual. And likewise, transphobia would be a prejudice or dislike of people who are transgender. And then heterosexism is the last term we have here. And that could be discrimination or prejudice against LGBTQ people based on the assumption that being heterosexual is the preferred or the normal sexual orientation. So we're going to, as Kim was saying, we have a 12-minute video that we created through Safe Spaces Committee. And as you're watching the video, we wanted you to think about what were your first messages about LGBTQ people, and where did they come from, and who did they come from, and were they based on fact, were they based on myth, and then also how have your views and your knowledge about this changed as you've gotten older.
Are you a boy or a girl?
Hey, freak. She said, what are you, a boy or a girl? Well, maybe this will help you decide.
I don't understand why everyone wants to put me in a box and bully me because I'm different from them.
What do I even look for? I need help with this. Okay, gender non-conforming. I guess that describes my child. Gender and Sexuality Alliance? I wonder if Alika's school has a club like that.
Welcome to the GSA Club.
Hi, I'm Alika. My pronouns are they, them. My mom said I should join this club because I have been getting bullied. Some people hate me because I don't feel like a boy or a girl.
Hi, Alika. I'm Bex. I've been bullied in the past because I'm a girl who likes girls. Welcome to our GSA Club. You're safe here.
Yes, this is a safe space. We welcome lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, gender non-conforming, queer, and questioning students. And of course, allies.
Hi, Alika. I'm Dylan. My older sister is trans, and I'm an ally. We're planning an alternative prom for students who want a safe space to dance and be themselves. It's going to be fabulous.
Aloha, Alika. My name is Evie. I'm a trans girl. My mom is the chair of the local PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays, and offers support for parents if your mom needs someone to talk to.
Hey, I'm Frank. I'm a straight trans guy. I go by he, him. Welcome to the GSA Club.
Why can't my kid just fit in and be like the other kids? I love Alika and I want them to be okay. It's just hard to know what the best thing to do is. If being gender non-conforming makes them subject to bullying and violence, should I just make them conform to society's expectations? You know, to keep Alika safe.
You love Alika and want them to be safe, but you don't know how they can be themselves and be free from bullying, harassment, or even worse, physical violence. That is an incredibly difficult position for you to be in as a caring mother. But trying to keep Alika from being who they are will not help them. They need to know you support and will protect them. They need to know that their identity is their own and that there's nothing wrong with how they identify. Their life may depend on it. Getting Alika involved in the school GSA is the right step. They will get a lot of support and will make friends there. And you will need support too. Please consider joining our PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays group.
Hey Bex, wait up! How did you get involved with the GSA? Did your mom tell you about it?
Actually, my mental health care coordinator told me about it when I went into foster care. So life was pretty hard. I told my mom that my uncle sexually abused me. Months later, when I came out to my mom, she said I'm a sinner, choosing to be gay because of what my uncle did to me and that I'm going to hell. I felt so alone, I just wanted to disappear. I ended up cutting myself pretty bad, and then they put me in Kahi. Things are better now. I'm in a foster home with a great family. A therapist visits me a couple of times per week. Sometimes we do fun stuff like play cards or basketball. She has really been helping me. She told me that my sexual orientation has nothing to do with my history of abuse. Being abused doesn't turn people gay or trans.
Wow, thanks for telling me your story, Bex. It sounds like your therapist has really helped you. I'm glad you found a safe place to live too.
Great talking to you, Alika. So I'll see you at the next GSA meeting?
Yeah, see you then.
Ow!
Hey, why are you staring at those kids? Are you gay or something?
Why would you say that? That's my sister. I'm not gay, but it wouldn't matter if I were. I am an ally. Gay and trans people deserve just as much love and respect as anyone else. Just because someone is labeled by society as one gender, it doesn't mean that is who they are on the inside. And people should be allowed to love who they love.
My dad says you gotta be strong to be a man. He says queers just need someone to rough them up so they'll learn how to be tough. My auntie said that gay people are pedophiles. That's why I thought you were gay when you were watching those little kids.
Those are stereotypes that people make up because they were raised to think that way, or they're afraid of someone who is different. I used to believe stereotypes too. When my sister came out as trans, I learned that you can't beat it out of somebody. She got beaten up plenty times, but she still became who she is. A lot of times, people will try to pretend they're somebody they are not, because they're scared of what other people will think or do. It takes a lot of courage to be who you are. Luckily, now there is a law saying that kids age 14 and older can see a therapist on their own without having to ask their parents' permission. This makes it easier for kids our age to talk to a trusted adult if their parents are not accepting. Oh, there's my friend Frank. You should meet him. Hey Frank, this is Carlos. Carlos, this is Frank.
Sup? So how do you two know each other?
We're both in the GSA club.
Oh, are you an ally too?
Well, actually, I'm a trans male.
Huh? I gotta go.
He seems confused.
I think Carlos might be questioning what he's been taught and who he is.
I told you, stop acting like a queer.
Gay and trans people deserve just as much love and respect as anyone else. Kids age 14 and older can see a therapist on their own. Easier for kids our age to talk to a trusted adult if their parents are not accepting.
Tonight we're meeting at the Rainbow Film Festival.
Hey Dylan. Hey Frank. Can I sit with you? I'm not gay, you know.
Okay. You don't have to be gay to join us. I'm straight too. I'm a guy who likes girls.
So how did you know you're a guy? I mean, can't you just be a lesbian if you gotta be queer?
I've heard that a lot, actually. Okay, let me explain. People can identify as cisgender, meaning they identify as the same gender they were assigned at birth. Or they can identify as transgender, like me, meaning they identify as the opposite gender assigned at birth. Ever since I can remember, I've always felt like I was the wrong gender. It never felt right being female. I've been so much happier and healthier since I transitioned to living as a male. But not all transgender people identify as male or female. There are people who identify as somewhere between male and female, and some might not identify as male or female at all. Kind of a third gender that Hawaiians called mahu. Gender, like someone's sexuality, can be on a spectrum.
Did you have a sex change operation?
Not everyone who is transgender takes hormones or has surgery to change their body. Transitioning is a personal and long process. The decision to have surgery or take hormones is a very private one. No one has any right to know that information unless I choose to tell them.
If it takes so long, why would anyone go through all of that?
It's an individual choice that each person has to make for themselves. Some people feel so wrong in their body that they feel they won't want to continue to live if they can't change their physical body to match their gender.
How would someone know if they're gay?
Carlos, I'm really glad you're asking these questions. Please just try to be respectful when you ask. It's important to learn about sexuality and gender. The movie's getting ready to start. Why don't you join us at our next GSA Club meeting so you can learn more about the ABCs of LGBTQ?
Maybe.
Hey, Carlos. Hey, what brings you to see me? see. Well, sounds like you're questioning a lot and you need some support. We can work through these issues together, and over time, we can help your dad to understand too.
Hey Dylan, hey Frank. Hi everyone, I'm Carlos. I know you might wonder why I'm here. I'm sorry I took out my anger on some of you before. For the past few months, I have been talking to someone who helped me realize that I was wrong.
Hey, Carlos. I'm glad you found someone to support you in working through your anger. It may take some time, though, for you to gain the trust of those you've bullied, but it does mean a lot that you are here.
Okay, so hopefully I'm back on the presentation mode. Okay, so we welcome any feedback you have about the video that we created, but as you can see, we're also going to talk about minority stress related to being a sexual and gender minority. And minority stress is basically that those additional stressors that people experience due to having a stigmatized minority status. And so minority stress factors for sexual minority people are they would maybe have experiences of negative events, and then the expectation that they would have future negative experiences. Sometimes it's internalized homophobia or transphobia, and sometimes concealment of identity. So intersectionality occurs when a sexual and gender minority have also another minority status, such as maybe they're a racial minority or an ethnic minority. And so then they may experience additional minority stress due to racism, xenophobia, discrimination based on other minority statuses, both from their family, community, but also could be from the LGBTQ community. And so this is kind of a really complex slide, but in general, this slide shows how sexual and gender minority youth are disproportionately at risk of being traumatized because of more likelihood to suffer from physical and emotional abuse by family members, singling them out, more likely to be sexually abused, more often become victims of sexual exploitation, and they're more at risk for being kicked out of their homes and having rejection from family members. And so all these things put them at higher risk for being involved in the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, and being victimized by bullying and having all these other issues.
Okay, so just to go over, review a few statistics in different areas that LGBTQ people are, especially kids, are more greatly affected. Some of these stats were within the video that you just saw, but just a quick review. The purple and pink slides are dealing more with transgender versus cisgender statistics, and then the different shades of green are sexual orientation, LGB, the LGB part of the acronym, and then heterosexual youth. So as you saw in the video, transgender youth are 7 times more likely to attempt suicide than cisgender youth. And then LGB youth who identify as LGB are 4 times more likely to attempt suicide. Same as far as purposely hurting themselves, as you can see again, much higher rates if you are transgender, 47, 50, and 38% for purposely hurting self, attempting suicide, and making a suicide plan. And then as far as LGB youth, again, you can see the much higher numbers for feeling sad or hopeless more than 2 weeks in a row in the past year, purposely hurting themselves and making a suicide plan. In fact, as far as having one adult to talk to, or feeling like they had one adult to talk to, again, you can see much lower for LGB youth than it is for heterosexual identified youth. And in fact, transgender youth, more than 1 in 3 do not have an adult figure or a teacher that they feel they can talk to about things that are important to them. And so in addition to substance abuse and mental health, there are huge effects as far as schooling goes and education. Again, this first slide talking about transgender versus cisgender youth was within the video. 40% of transgender youth have been bullied, either electronically or at school. And you can see again the 29% in each location compared to the much smaller number of cisgender identified youth. So with the bullying as a result, transgender youth are less likely to feel safe. So they skip school because they don't feel safe, 4 times more likely to skip school, and LGBT youth are 2 times more likely to skip school. Then that just snowballs even further into obviously not getting good grades if you're not going to school regularly. So as you can see, heterosexual identified youth have better grades typically and are looking at going to a post-high school program. Even worse for transgender youth, statistically, 2/3 of transgender youth do not believe they will complete a post-high school program. And then as far as a few other disparities, transgender youth are 4 times more likely to have been physically forced to have sexual intercourse, and LGBT youth 2 times more likely. Transgender youth 3 times more likely to go hungry compared to cisgender youth. And then as far as unstable housing, transgender youth 8 times more likely than cisgender youth to not have stable housing, which results in much higher percentage of numbers within the foster care system and as well in the juvenile justice system. And then LGBT youth are 2 times more likely to have unstable housing. Cisgender youth on the opposite side are 6 times more likely to actually get enough sleep every night.
And I just wanted to mention that all these statistics that we have shown here are Hawaii's statistics based on the Youth Risk Behavior Survey results from 2017, I think.
I think 2018 was some of them as well, a little bit more recent. Yeah, so we, just a quick overview for creating safe spaces. We have a short video to show you on pronouns, but it's really important, first of all, as providers, as mental health providers, teachers, whatever your role might be, is to examine your own beliefs. That's one thing that we mentioned before the first video is, where did your beliefs come from? And who did you get them from? And how have they evolved over time? So we're going to show a short video on the use of pronouns.
Just because I may present more femme doesn't mean that I'm any less they, them.
You know what, that thing where you're eating a meal, but you're not really eating a meal, you're just kind of picking at food on the counter. My family and I were doing that one night, and I just kind of looked at them and said, hey guys, I'm non-binary. I don't have a gender.
In my opinion, gender is a universe. It is a broad spectrum of planets and stars and sky that truly cannot be contained into a binary.
My pronouns are they, them, theirs, and that's a non-negotiable. And they were all kind of like, okay.
I think one of the main reasons pronouns are so important is because other than our name, it's one of the main ways that people identify and call us.
My pronouns are personally very important to me. Growing up, enculturated into kind of a system that really subscribes to toxic masculinity, I was always uncomfortable with being called dude, what's up, man. I was so bad at dapping people up, how guys do that whole like that thing. I was so bad at that, and it just I felt very alienated every time someone would do that to me.
So when someone identifies with a pronoun, they're essentially taking their little piece of that broad universe and identifying with that. And so in using their correct pronouns, we're validating that yes, you are right in your identity and you are important and we're respecting you.
Coming into terms with my gender queer identity has been one of the most challenging but also rewarding things that I've done.
Laverne Cox kind of famously said, misgendering a trans person is an act of violence. And it is. It's an act of psychological violence. It's a denial of somebody's personhood and a complete refusal to acknowledge their identity, whether intentional or not.
And so it is something that is entirely wrapped around our everyday lives. So just walking into a restaurant and hearing someone say she, will happen within 2 seconds of me entering, which doesn't happen about any of my other identities. They're not gonna be like, oh, you straight person, that doesn't happen. But automatically someone will make assumptions about gender which translate into pronouns, which mean that I will hear over and over again people saying something about my identity which is false.
I think a lot of people associate expression with identity, and sometimes that's not the case. Oftentimes I'm in situations where I'm not the most safe being able to express my gender identity, and in those cases, even in those instances where I'm wearing basketball shorts or sneakers, you can't take my gender identity away from me because that's mine and not yours.
So many different options for who you are and how to define that. So when someone chooses a personal pronoun that they identify with, using that pronoun is a form of respect and a form of validation that yes, this is your rightful identity and I will respect that.
And I know personally when I get misgendered, by strangers it's one thing, but it's especially painful when it's people who are close to you. So when my parents misgender me, it's a knife in my heart because they're the people whose opinions matter more to me than anybody else's.
And not knowing how to combat it. It is constant and it is such a prevalent part of our society that being misgendered happens countless times in a day, and that builds up really quickly, and it can really be difficult for a person to hear over and over again because it invalidates your identity over and over and over again.
Pronouns are important because they are the smallest and easiest way that you can acknowledge somebody's identity.
And I also don't like that people call them their preferred pronouns because it's also not a preference. It's who they are. You need to use those pronouns. It's literally an extension of my arm or my leg. It's just as a part of me as a vital organ. My identity, although you can't see it, still needs to be validated just as much as you would validate the fact that I have 5 fingers or 5 toes.
Well, Kim's getting us back onto the PowerPoint. If anybody has any questions or anything you want to put in the chat, feel free. Okay, so we're going to continue with the creating safe spaces overview. So next, see maintain confidentiality, just as you would with any other personal information. It's not our job to out another person, a child who comes out to you, maybe in therapy or as a trusted adult in whatever role you might have. Confidentiality, it's their responsibility, and they will do it in their time when they are ready. And we'll talk about a little bit more about the coming out process, but and it's important to assess and address the impacts of LGBTQ status on the presenting issues. Just because someone is LGBTQ doesn't mean every issue that's presented is a result of being LGBTQ. But then it's also very important to understand, does their LGBTQ status, is it part of the reason that there are presenting issues? And being LGBTQ does not automatically make one have issues, mental health issues, substance abuse issues. It's the discrimination or stressors that they are facing by society in general. And as far as the coming out process, I guess the one thing to really understand is it's not a one-time thing, it's a lifetime thing. Okay, understand that someone who's LGBTQ has to come out almost every time they're in a new situation. If they're going to a child going to a new school, say going from elementary to middle school, new teachers, new friends, and then as you get older, a new job, they have to decide when to come out. Is it safe to come out or not? And and the reason they have to come out is because like we talked about earlier, heterosexism is the assumption that everybody is heterosexual and that is the normal orientation. So coming out process is something that they have to decide when and if it's safe for them to do. Creating a physically affirming environment is some very easy things you can do in your office, your classroom, wherever it is that you work. I could just talk about our office a little bit. We have posters that have safe spaces, LGBTQ. We have rainbow flags, small rainbow flags on almost all of our desks in our common areas. So when we have a potential client coming in the door, or a client, they know this is a safe place for them. And then advocating for equity, it takes allies to help LGBTQ people gain equality. Okay, so it's important for allies. You can't just say, "Oh, I'm cisgender. I don't identify as LGBTQ, so that's not it's not my problem." But it's very important to help and advocate for equity for everybody. And then Kim also is going to list some LGBTQ specific resources at the end of this PowerPoint, and I believe we're going to share the PowerPoint with everyone as well.
Yeah, and I just wanted to touch on practicing linguistic competence, and I think this is basically the idea that you can never really be competent because the language is constantly evolving. And so just sort of checking in with, if you're working one-on-one with an individual, checking in with them about what terminology they use and trying to mirror their language is really important, because we don't want to make assumptions about people. Like we don't want people to make assumptions about us and the terminology that we use for ourselves too. And with regard to confidentiality, it's really important that we don't stigmatize being LGBTQ. And so we want people to be open, but at the same time, we have to be very careful about sharing that information amongst coworkers, amongst other team members who may or may not be, on board, so to speak, or, and also what is documented in the record, because if a youth is not out to their family members or to their parents, and the parent wants a copy of the medical record, that could be potentially damaging to that young person. So we have to be very careful about how we maintain confidentiality. And as far as the physically affirming environment, I would say also to advocate for non-gendered restrooms in your workplace. And then here are just some evidence-based interventions that are typically helpful for LGBTQ youth. So you saw in our video that the kids in the cartoon were, attending a Gender and Sexuality Alliance club, and doing activities like that together. And those have been shown to be really supportive and helpful in reducing bullying in schools and providing safe spaces for youth. And then as far as like therapeutic evidence-based family acceptance projects, family support model is evidence-based, as well as Family Acceptance Project has worked with some TFCBT folks to create a model specific for LGBTQ. And then they also have an Alternatives for Families CBT model that is for families who are maybe more abusive towards LGBTQ youth. And hopefully, maybe some of our panelists might know of other interventions that might work well with this population as well. So here's some resources for youth, for families, for providers and schools. And I will make sure to get all this to Tommy so they can be distributed. And in the meantime, here's our contact information. And I guess we're ready for whatever comes next.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kim and Robin. Now we're going to pivot a little bit. I would like to please introduce our three discussants, and then we can turn it over to either their initial thoughts, go to question and answers, however the panelists and the presenters want to move forward. Okay, so in terms of our discussants, first we have Dr. Laura Anderson. And she has been a licensed child and family psychologist for more than 20 years and is lucky to have called Hawaii home for most of her career. She has spent countless hours with kids, teens, and families in the offices, homes, facilities, and school settings. In the past decade, Dr. Anderson has done a deep dive into specializing in the provision of services to gender expansive and LGBTQ plus kids, teens, and their caregivers and families. She is a member of the UCSF Mind the Gap Mental Health Consortium for mental health providers who are gender specialists. Dr. Anderson also spent time as the co-founder of Parenting in the Gap, a group under the umbrella of the Mind the Gap group that focuses on training therapists to work effectively with family members of gender expansive youth. For both personal and professional reasons, Dr. Anderson is passionate about helping LGBTQ plus youth and their families, and is passionate about helping these families feel seen, safe, and supported. So welcome, Dr. Anderson. Next, we'll turn to, I'd like to introduce Raquel Chang, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified substance abuse counselor. Raquel is currently a behavioral health specialist, or BHS, at Kahuku High, an intermediate school, working with 7th to 12th graders, and has been a BHS for 7 years. She has been with the DOE for 4 years before taking a hiatus to the Big Island for 5.5 years as the chief clinical officer in a substance abuse and mental health organization called the Big Island Substance Abuse Council, or BISAC. Raquel is a wife and a mother of 3 daughters, 1 foster son, and 5 grandchildren from her foster son and middle daughter, who brings so much joy into their lives. Welcome, Raquel. And last but not least, we have Tiffany Dara. Tiffany is a former foster youth who served on the High Hopes Leadership Board for 7.5 years, advocating for systems change in foster care. She also currently serves as a young fellow with the nationwide Jim Casey Youth Opportunity Initiative. During her time in foster care, Tiffany received mental health services, which drives her ambition for her current work and future goals of maintaining a degree in psychology. Tiffany currently works as a youth partner Epic Ohana, and with Epic Ohana, and works directly with youth receiving CAMD services. Tiffany used her lived experience to help with the youth she works with to learn and advocate for themselves and develop positive coping skills. She is passionate about helping to change the lives of the youth she works with. And in her free time, she likes to write poetry and go to the beach. So without further ado, a special welcome to Dr. Anderson, Raquel, and Tiffany. And we can turn it to them for initial thoughts and reactions, and or to anybody for questions and comments. Going on mute now.
I guess I can start off. I'm like, everyone is still muted, so I'll start off. I have seen the ABCs of LGBTQ video multiple times, so I just want to say that I think that, you know, there's a lot of truth in that video, right? And what's portrayed in that video, and the feelings behind a lot of the young people. And so I think that is great. But I wanted to touch also on Robin, what you were saying about um asking if asking permission, right? And making sure that it's okay to talk about um the young people, um and making sure that like the families know before saying it, because you don't want to out them, right? That's really, really important. Because I was working with a or I am working with a young person, and I was in a meeting, and I heard a therapist like say, oh yeah, she broke up with a girlfriend, and I was like, I didn't know that she was that she was dating a girl, and I was like, "Oh no." So when I met with the young person, I asked her, this came up at the meeting. So first question that I want to ask is, did mom and dad already know? Right? Because if not, then, that was just a really big oops on the therapist part, right? Like I wanted to make sure that the youth felt safe. um and then, we had that conversation, and so it really is about making those safe spaces, and making sure that the young person feels safe. um and then, yeah, always asking about their preferred pronouns. Like I always like to make it as fun as possible too, right? And I'm just like, you know, I identify also in LGBT. Like if they start to bring it up, I'm just like, this is a totally safe space. I will be as transparent as possible. Transparency is a big thing also with youth. Um, because if they feel like you're not being authentic, they're gonna be like, why am I gonna talk to you if you're not really here for me? Right? So I think that that's also a big thing. So a lot of really, really great points being touched on here.
Hi, everyone. So for me, I had the opportunity to attend some of Dr. Anderson's presentations. And so I think that's where I saw the ABCs of the LGBTQ. I think it was on that one. I'm not exactly sure, but I just found a lot of value in it. And it's very relevant for me that I can actually share with the parents. I guess I just tend to have a lot of the kids that are just on their journey. Some of them are on the journey to transition, or just, coming out, or just kind of like on that cusp of like, what do I do with, as far as their identity, gender identity and whatnot. And so for me, it's just high school is such a challenging place for the youth that I work with. And so I work with from 7th to 12th grade. And so I have that whole range. We don't kind of have just 7th graders or 8th graders and whatnot. And so they're just at varying degrees. And I have a young person that I work with that, and especially when it was mentioned in the presentation about misgendering, and there's teachers that will be referring to my young person as a she. He's very feminine, but he still identifies right now as a male. And so I will say, no, it's a he, it's a he. And they're like, oh, really? And so oftentimes, they just need to be in meetings, or just in talking with the teachers. I'll just kind of let them know that that's the pronouns that he wants at this point in time. Things haven't changed. And so they just important, even our student services coordinator was referring to him as a she. And I says, no, it's a he, and so it's so important. And I think these videos that were shared would be really good to share with either our teachers or even some of the parents that I am currently working with that, they have children that are in transition. And so this is a great resources that I got today that I can pass on. And I apologize, we have our band practicing outside, so there might be some Christmas music you guys can hear in the background, but hey, it is Christmas time, so it works. So, but I just appreciate the opportunity to be here and to learn and from all of you, and have this opportunity to be able to share this with my parents and the students that I work with, and let them know that they have a safe place when they come in to meet with me. And I'm gonna also expand that and make it even further of a safe place, so that they know when they walk in here that they can know that I support them on every level possible. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. And I'm happy, I'm sure other folks would agree, to happy to take questions. If anything, left question marks in your head, if you're wondering about the connections. I think a couple of quick thoughts I have. One, sometimes when I have parents who see those statistics, like a lot of the time when parents are first learning that their kids are coming out, they Google, and some of the first stuff they see are these statistics. And I want to make it really clear to folks that the best way we have of understanding it and how the parents understand is that those are correlational statistics, not causal, meaning that oftentimes parents think, and have said to me, but I'm worried that my kid is going to be LGBTQ because all of those kids have problems. Like if you look at the statistics, they're like much more likely to this and that, and right. So they've begun to think that sexual abuse causes identifying as gay, lesbian, or trans, rather than recognizing that people are more vulnerable to be perpetrated against if they don't have support for their identities, and they don't have secure adults watching them, helping them feel secure, helping them use good intent, helping them be safe and be seen and be okay. And so same is true with the depression and anxiety. One of the really powerful things we know is if we can work with families, caregivers, Ohana, extended aunties, and find the families, get the family what they need to be affirming, a lot of those statistics even out. And that's what I talk to parents about. Like, I know you want to protect your kids. I know you do. And many times, as we heard in the video, those videos are great. I wish I could take credit. I was enjoying that very much because you highlighted some really powerful stereotypes that I think people are even hesitate to talk about in trainings, and maybe just kind of went there in terms of naming it. And I think that's really important, because otherwise the parents and caregivers and teachers that are sitting in our office have all that same information. Like one of my first trainings was, it's the water we swim in. We are raised with this messaging around the stereotypes with this stuff. And so it's important to name those. So one key takeaway I would say when I saw that was really reminding folks the depression and the anxiety is not like because gay and trans people have issues, which I hear a lot. It is actually navigating the minority stress and the fact that other people hold so many stereotypes and biases about these identities that contribute to the depression and anxiety that we see. And my last other thought too is just a little plug for, if you're tuning in from an agency or you work with folks in a group setting, reach out if it would be helpful to get specific training on how to ask. That's one of the key things I talk about. Many times I have found that agencies I work in were deciding which kids to ask about their identity, right? They thought some kids didn't need to be asked, but we were using our own idea of what a gay kid might look or feel like in our office before we started talking about whether or not kids are gay or trans or what pronouns they use. And if agencies really, truly, genuinely work it into all of their intakes, make it a part of everything they do, because we all have a sexual orientation, a gender identity and expression, then workers can build competence and confidence and can also genuinely say to young people, hey, I ask everybody this as I'm getting to know them, right? I use the pronouns she and her. Which pronouns best describe you? And that really can take some of the sting out of kids who may feel, because of the bias, that you're saying something's wrong with them if you're asking if they're gay, or you're insulting them in some way if you're asking if they're gay. So weaving it into your agency practices helps build staff competence, and it also makes it really genuine when you approach folks and say, we don't want to make assumptions about people. I don't want to assume anything about you. So I'm going to ask you a few things about your identity so that we make sure that you're being seen and I'm not making assumptions. That doesn't mean that every kid's going to come out to you when you ask, but it certainly sends a cue to a child that this is a safe place to be able to talk about it. And the more staff members have talked about it, the more comfortable they'll feel having these conversations with folks, because it's learning about your client the same way you're learning about their school likes and dislikes and their family constellations and what matters to them. So, yes, I'll let somebody else speak now to that first question. I have some thoughts, but I'm chatting on. So I can see the question here of one of the other panelists. I have some parents that say this is a fad they're going through. Any suggestions on addressing this? I'll be quiet now and hop in on that afterwards.
Well, first, I just wanted to, I had another thought while you were speaking also about the coming out process first, because I wanted to say it is a constant thing, right? So first, if a child does decide to come out to you, it is a big thing, for one, and they will have to consistently do it throughout their life and choose who to come out to. So that is a really hard thing to do. And I think that kind of segues into answering this question in a way. And then other people can kind of stack on to answering the question as well. But for me personally, I didn't even come out for years, right? Because one, I was kind of shot down at any chance that I could get to try to come out. Because initially I was told, if you end up like your mom, because my mom had also dated women, then you can't live in my house. So I had it in my mind of, okay, I can't say anything then, right? And so I just didn't. And then as soon as I turned 18, I was like, okay, well, this is how it is. I like women. And now if you don't want me to be here, I'll move. Right. And then my grandma was like, okay, well, it's probably just a phase. Right. So there it was. It's just a phase. And I'm like, well, I've been dating this person for like over 2 years now. You just didn't know about it. So it's not a phase. Right. But so, a lot of times when a young person does come out, it has taken them a lot of time to think about how they're going to say it. So just addressing it in a delicate manner of not dismissing them, right? Finding a way to say like, okay, like, have you looked into this? Like, have you thought about what this means for you? Like, what does that mean for you? Right? Really asking and not saying like it's a phase thing, because then they won't want to come to you in the future is kind of my advice, because then, how will they come to you for other advice? Is kind of my advice for that, just from my experience. But if anyone wants to come and kind of piggyback on that.
And then I don't mind saying quickly too, I think what this cuts back to the question too, I hear a lot. How do they know? Are they too young to know? Which I think gets at the next question, that I can also kind of peek at. But the phase thing accidentally tells a kid that they can't know themselves, and it communicates to a child that you're kind of secretly hoping it will be just right. We never, if our fifth grade son or our third grade daughter says she has a crush on a boy, we don't say, oh, I bet that's just a fake, right? Like if we see a heterosexual relationship with kids, we never comment, well, maybe that's for now, but who knows? I mean, the process is similar. You know, young kids can notice. The average age that folks in the research I've seen can tell us roughly their sexual orientation, broadly speaking, in the data is 10. And they're knowing the same way, you know, they notice who they notice. And they notice when their heart rate picks up, and they notice who they're picking out in a cast of characters on TV. And it's a similar process. And I think it accidentally, I really appreciate, you know, Tiffany saying about it closes doors on a conversation rather than opening, because if your child is coming to you over time, there's room for growth. What happens, a lot of the high risk behaviors for LGBTQ youth come from the secrecy and the shame. You know, they're looking for then people who will affirm, who you know, who are making decisions because they're getting messages like that can't be real, we kind of hope it goes away, that add to some of those behaviors. So I think, number one, recognize that the assumption that everything is trendy now, like I also hear that a lot. Interestingly enough, I hear from a lot of folks who are not LGBTQ plus, and I identify as cis and heterosexual as well. I have parenting experience around some of this, but I'm cisgender and heterosexual. And I hear from a lot of my cisgender, heterosexual, progressive friends, oh, everybody these days is LGBTQ. Oh, the kids don't care at all. And my caseload is full of LGBTQ kids who are really having a hard time navigating their identities and still being targeted. And so it's curious to me that from a privileged position, it looks like the world is different. And is it changing? Yeah, but our kids still, I mean, and I also hear other people say, we don't think that happens in Hawaii. So I appreciate that the video is based in Hawaii, that the statistics are based in Hawaii, because there are still really specific stressors here around that. I think in terms of the disclosure question for the gender stuff, with this question over here, so that everybody can see, is there a tendency for folks to understand their gender identity at earlier ages? Does sexual orientation awareness tend to happen later? And is there a layer of experimentation or exploration during puberty? Those are big questions, but I'll say in a nutshell from the research that I know, sexual orientation, roughly, these are all, you know, everybody has an individual journey, is 10. There's a group of early disclosures around gender identity stuff because the research is still evolving. So preschool is a big point at which sometimes like 3-4 kids will sort of say like, you know, I'm a girl, but mom, you know, I'm a girl. So 3-4 is a big age when we see some early, and we call those early disclosures in the work that I do. The onset of puberty is another big time where kids are noticing what's happening in their body and what's changing, or their cognitive awareness is allowing them to express something that they may have known. So puberty is another time where we see an uptick in kids identifying that this is something that them, or they just sort of assumed everybody else was having the same relationship to their body in puberty, and now they're learning from their peers that's not the case. And then I'll let other folks, if they wanted, I mean, anybody chime in on what I've said, but also this idea of what are you seeing in terms of exploration and experimentation in either community? I'll sit on it.
I'll just kind of chime in as far as for in the high schools. Yeah, I'm still, you know, I mean, yeah, it's Hawaii, and there is acceptance on some levels, but there's still bullying, you know, for this population, and it's painful for them to come out and to explore as far as their gender and their sexuality and have it be safe and accepting. And so I'm still seeing that, you know, doing what I can to help address that for the students that I work with and whatnot. And so just try and be supportive, and then helping the parents. So it's just, and helping the teachers, and helping everyone to just, understand the process. And as far as it being a fad, I'm not necessarily seeing that being a fad. I think it's more of a transition phase kind of a process, where it seems like, oh, maybe it's a fad, and they may be doing some exploration, but I don't really see, it being any kind of a phase or fad for the students that I work with. It's just more a part of their journey to identifying in a safe way, in a safe place of who they are and who they love, type of thing. And so that's what I'm seeing and whatnot in the schools.
I think too, one other piece of information that's helpful, when they looked recently, I think it was 2017, they surveyed a group of transgender adults and said, what age did you know and what age did you tell? And the average age at that time of knowing was about 8 years, 7.9 years or 8 years. They had some clarity. They didn't tell until the average age of 16 or 17. So that's a decade where typically people may be sort of exploring, meaning trying to decide what is safe, understanding, is their experience different from others? Is it the same? To whom is it similar? What will be okay? And we're learning the journey is really different for different kids in terms of how soon they're how clear and how soon are they expressive about how clear they are. The other thing that I communicate to families and schools is that we know, like, if there's any question about the validity, we know more harm is done in the silencing. And again, this comes from the place where parents will say, but if I let my kid identify this way and it isn't going to stick, now I've just put them in middle school, having announced this to people. And then they're always going to be that weird kid, or if they change their mind later, like if I say yes to too much as a parent, am I setting my kid up for heartache and bullying in a different way than if I just get them to wait until they're 100% sure? Sometimes what it takes for the kids who aren't the crystal clear early disclosers is living in it a little bit in spaces, using the pronouns at home with folks that are safe, and actually really feeling your gender. Because we learn about our gender in two ways. One, from the world around us, how people gender us in a restaurant, how, what they tell us about who they think we are. But there's also a whole part of gender that has to do with, a person, their body, themselves, no audience is around, and how okay they feel in that. And so sometimes it's a really thoughtful process to help kids get clear. That's when we look at how often this is happening now, there is some indication that there are more kids telling us about this now. And yet it's also been in all kinds of cultures around the world forever and ever. And I think we just really need to be clear with folks that the silencing, the shaming, the trying to talk people out of it is what's at the seat of the harmful statistics we do have. And the single most protective way that you can show up for a kid is to walk with them and find out what they need. And if their identity doesn't end up being anything other than cisgender or heterosexual, then you've been a killer ally and you've raised a kid who's a killer ally, and the world needs those anyway. So I think about it. So yeah.
I want to give people a chance to ask questions because I'm talk a lot. I don't want to talk too much. But I think for our clinicians and some of our service providers, you talked a little bit about this, not outing a kid if they're not ready to tell. This becomes sort of difficult with documentation because we want our providers to know that this may be an issue that needs to be addressed. They may need some support with this, but we also don't want to out them. And, I think some of the guidance I've given is don't document it in anything that the parent may read, and have private conversations with providers and being very clear that this is a private matter for this youth and can put them at risk and all sorts of things. But I don't know if any of you have additional thoughts about that or suggestions about how to handle that. Because I guess the other thing I wanted to add is when the kid sees a report, if a youth sees a report identifying them as the wrong gender that they don't identify as, right? That can be really harmful for them. Like, I told you this is how I want to be referred to. And so it's kind of that battle of how do we honor that, but also keep them safe.
I'll say quickly, I talk a lot with kids about that ahead of time. I've had to do it in family sessions too. I think it's one of the hardest parts of the work is when I know in my sessions that a child has disclosed a pronoun that is right for them and the family isn't accepting yet, or they don't know yet, then I have to do the mental gymnastics, right? It's on me to be able to hold that for folks to protect this protected identity. And I will also prepare kids for that ahead of time. Or if their parents know that it's a thing, but they refuse, in my experience, the work with, and this is a whole other training, but the work with parents is strategic. And if I come into a meeting the first time I'm meeting parents and call their child by a name and use a pronoun that is alarming, unfamiliar, then they're going to think I now have this agenda, right? And so I will let a kid know ahead of time, hey, here's the deal. This is how I work. Over the years, I've seen parents need time for the wheels to turn and the gears to change. And so you may hear me in reference to you use these, like, trust me, I know there's a process. It's my job to do this and this. I have heard you. I will honor it when we're together, but I'm also trying to respect your privacy. And I want to be able to keep your parents in the process with me. And if I chase them out really early, they're not going to stay and learn with us. So I will actually name that for young people, because I did have, especially now in the days of COVID, I was doing a family session and I had a young person listening through the out of sight, listening to what was happening, and was furious that I was not using their name. And I was reminded of how important it is to prepare kids if that's ever part of my strategy. And I'm not, luckily I could genuinely say, I usually do that. I just had met your parents and I forgot to do the prep in this one session. And it reminded me again, like, right, I have to have a really explicit conversation with young people about when I'm using which identifier and why. So.
And along similar lines, I think sometimes it can be difficult to correct our peers or colleagues when they're using incorrect pronouns, because often people get defensive, I think, where they just don't know. I think if you approach it in the wrong way, people become defensive. And I don't know if all of you have thoughts about how to manage that.
If I could just add something to that question, for the staff here at Maui Family Guidance Center, I've been very adamant about making sure that we're using the right pronouns, and if we're not, correcting people, so people know that if they're misgendering a client, they will be corrected, and people have gotten better about getting it right. And it's not uncomfortable anymore. At first it was, but we've been doing this for a few years and it's gotten so much better. I'm really proud of the way our staff is able to, understand and use the correct pronouns. And even if we're in a provider meeting and they're misgendering, I will say something there too. Maybe a little less blunt, but just to make sure that I'm clear that this is the pronouns I'm under the, I've been told that they want to be referred to. Is that incorrect? So that they're getting the message, oh, okay, yeah, we're using the wrong pronouns. But I think if you keep, not let it slide, keep addressing it with professionals, eventually people are getting used to, like, oh yeah, okay, Not everybody, goes by the gender that's on this piece of paper or in this form yet. So, and everybody's putting the correct gender identity in our electronic health record. So it's getting so much better, and it is getting easier.
People were talking about creating affirming environments. And one of my favorite studies is a study that looked at, as states started to pass same-sex marriage laws, and they did it at different times, right? It wasn't like on this date everyone changed. So it gave this natural scientific design, I felt like, and they looked at pre-law and post-law suicide attempts by high schoolers. And they found that when the state developed a same-sex marriage law, that the suicide attempts dropped in high schoolers. And that's such a wonderful kind of evidence that this creating an affirming world really does matter.
I think to the question is both. For me, it's both exactly what Robin was talking about, and it's also just saying to people, it's pointing out the heteronormativity, it's pointing out the cis normativity. It is, again, the water we swim in. Hey, this takes a little while to change. Hey, we get it that this may feel new to you. We get it, and we're hurting clients if we don't get this right. It really actively, as you heard that in the video, and I've had people say gut punch from strangers, but it's a knife stab from family. Like, I don't know that people understand that it's not the same as getting my pronoun wrong, because it's not a core protected identity for me. So if somebody misgendered me, I would just correct them and keep moving, but it's not the same for a lot of folks if they've expressed it's important to them. And so I think just helping staff understand that we hear over and over again that misgendering is a really significant source of stress. Kids who are walking on these journeys wait, like we call it gender noise. They spend a lot of time, many of them during the day, not all again, but many waiting to see how they will be gendered, who will slip up, is anybody going to correct them, around how does that work? And so again, considering privacy and advocacy, it's important that if you've had these conversations with young people, what do you want me to do if we're in a meeting and that happens? What's comfortable for you? I know you're not out here. So there's a problem solving piece to the work in terms of what do you want my advocacy to look like when I'm supporting you in living in this space. So yeah, and I know there was another question from Beth around people moving between sexual orientations, like identifying as gay or bi or pansexual. That's a term we haven't used today. That question comes up for me. Folks will ask, and pansexual, like even in using the word, it's so funny. I'm not funny, but it's important how the language continues to change, because even using the term bisexual suggests there are only two sexes to whom a person could be attracted to, right? There are these categories of sexes. Now, pansexual means I'm attracted to the being. I am attracted to people who identify as male or female, or identify as non-binary, or they identify as trans male or trans female or whatever. So it just means the gender category of this other person doesn't dictate whether or not I'm romantically or sexually attracted to them. If anybody's a Schitt's Creek fan, it's the part about it's the wine I like, not the label. Episode that was in there. It's the wine, it's the person, it's the spirit, it's the being. And so is there some fluidity to sexuality? I would be happy to have other folks address that directly. I mean, in my experience, there are some people who have changed how they've identified their sexual orientation across the lifespan. For some people, it is much more fixed. And so if you're dealing with a person who is telling you that it is shifting, again, the important piece is to not define it for them.
to accept that there are people along the whole host and the spectrum, some of whom may notice new attractions, may find that their attractions genuinely changed. For some folks, it's really fixed. Other people can't change no matter, it's like some are really fixed and some are more fluid in my best understanding of things. And if other folks would like to speak to that, I'm happy to be quiet.
Well, I am no expert, but I was noticing that I haven't chimed in and everybody else has. So I feel a little pressure from the group that I have to say something. But yeah, on that particular issue, I'm not sure if I really know the answer to about how common it is. I really couldn't say, but I do really appreciate that one slide from the presentation that was kind of like, maybe the first step to being kind of a safe space creator or an ally is to think a little bit about like, what are my beliefs coming from and what are my kind of preconceived notions. And I have to admit, probably something that I've always kind of come into some of this with is I can be an ally and be safe with anyone. Just pick what you're going to identify as, stick with it, and we're good. But is that really a very safe and affirming kind of belief system for me to kind of come in with? And where in the world did I come up with that arbitrary rule that you have to just pick one thing and stick with it, and you can't ever change from that? I think, I don't know, I guess I might need to struggle with that a little bit more, but I'm thinking it might be some kind of old belief from an old, I don't know, something somebody gave me. I really think, maybe, so maybe for the question asker, I would just maybe throw that observation out that I wonder what it is about, well, me personally, or maybe just about our culture in general, that we've maybe come a long way with accepting and supporting people who identify as a sexual or gender minority, but only so long as they pick one thing and stick with it and never deviate from that. Like that just doesn't feel right to me, to kind of default back to that belief system. So I guess I would say, I don't know how common it is, but maybe it's more common than we even realize, because maybe there's a lot of that going on, and maybe some folks are just kind of stuck in that old way of thinking. I don't know.
And I feel like that is kind of the crux of our profession, is that we want to help people change and we want them to be who they are and be better. But then we still are like, oh, well, from what they've done before, this is just the same thing they're going to do again. And I see myself doing that at times, whether it be, choosing, to do a certain behavior, or how they're identifying. So I think it is just our natural tendency to predict behavior in a certain way. But that is also another part of our profession, is that unconditional positive regard. And that is the actual safe space that we can create, is that no matter what you choose, if it's changing from one day to another, it might drive me nuts because I can't put it in my box, and that is really hard for me, but I still care about you no matter what. But it is, I face that struggle too, Kurt, where I'm predicting these kids are going to do the same thing over and over again. But I think that's just something that we have to learn how to manage, because our brains kind of go to that place automatically. So I share that same struggle with you.
Yeah. Well, and even as I'm talking about it, I'm facetiously giving the example of, well, just, pick what it is and stick with it. And it's not even a choice. And so now I'm recognizing that even in my fake worldview that I created to make my point, I'm using language that is not really very, affirming. Even I love this topic, and I love kind of being, kind of part of these types of discussions, because I always feel like as soon as I think I have it figured out and I'm getting close to expert status, I'm like, oh God, dang, I am not an expert. I make mistakes around this. So I think this is a great topic and one that just keeps challenging us to learn and develop and grow as clinicians and as teachers and supporters and parents and allies. And, it's yeah, so good topic.
All right, this panel was exceptional in all regards. So thank you, everybody. Just two things real quick. Just going to do some housekeeping on if you're interested in social work CEUs, then we'll turn it over to Tiffany for any closing thoughts that she might have. So and she'll bring us home in that regard. So as a friendly reminder, whichever email you use for today's roundtable, please be on the lookout for a feedback survey that we'll be sending to you at that email address. If you've signed up to receive social work CEUs, the CEUs will be awarded based on both your time in the webinar today, as well as completing the forthcoming survey. You'll be expected to have attended at least 90% of today's roundtable to be considered for the awarding of the CEUs. Even if you haven't, however, if you're not interested in CEUs, as always, we're looking for any helpful feedback on our survey about improving these types of roundtable experiences. So please consider filling them out. And now I will turn it over to Tiffany for any closing thoughts.
Yeah, I think that our conversation this afternoon has been awesome. Just a lot of stuff to really think about, touching on what Jamie and Kurt have both been saying, like just the thoughts of like, how everything is kind of a spectrum, right? Like, I mean, LGBT, like, there's a reason why it's a rainbow, right? Everything is like represented by a rainbow. Like we've always known that like we're on a spectrum in a way, right? But gender, sexual identity and everything is on a spectrum. So, I mean, there are no limits to it. So just when working with youth, just remember to keep your mind open and remember that like the possibilities are endless and to work with them with empathy and, just keep that in your minds and your hearts. And I think that no matter what, there's no failing when you are just trying to do good, right? So, yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day. That closes us out. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.